I'm Dr. J.C. Baker with the Business Hospital of J.C. Baker and Associates. And so we have a global team. We are a hospital. When you think about us, we're like your primary care physician. You come to your primary care physician, no matter if you want a physical or if you're injured. We help businesses in that same way internationally. And we do that through information, innovation, ideation, and imagination. So a lot of the perspective that we bring comes from these four eyes. So what you all are here for today is how to unstick stuck deals. And so as we think about that, and it's a tongue twister to say the least, is that that's probably the most frustrating part of business is that you get into business or you go to get a deal done and then it just sits there and it freezes or it goes cold or it never goes anywhere, and you're trying to figure out, well, how do we get past that? You put so much effort into getting a person to understand that you have a service or that you have a company and that they should engage with you, and then nothing manifests from that. And then you're wondering, how do I capitalize on those previous efforts? And so with that, we want to be able to help get past some of that. Before I get started, is there anything specific that anyone wants to say or start with or have a question of any type before I jump into the slides? Okay, so we'll go ahead and move forward from here. So the first portion is sales, and sales is the fundamental concept of business. The reason why we're starting with sales is because most business owners do not see themselves as salespeople. They don't fancy that they're a sales professional. They think that I'm really good at something or I like to create something, and so that's my business. But the reality is, the sales is the mechanism that makes it go. And whether you're talking about selling the actual service or product itself, or whether you're talking about selling a relationship, becoming a high level salesperson has everything to do with how much your business will or will grow or will not grow. So because it's the fundamental concept of business, we have to understand, well, how do we engage with that? How do we learn more about that? And so sales are the activities related to the offering and buying of products, services over a given time. I want to focus in on a few things here. Is one, the activities. This word here is problematic for a lot of people. And the reason why I say it's problematic is because those activities are almost never formalized. They just become random or spontaneous activity, or they become activities that are not connected to a source. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. It's also a process, and it's a process of negotiation for the exchange of values. Well, if we connect these things, is that fundamentally you should be doing things in a process that gives one of your values for someone else's values. If we were in a classroom setting, I would actually ask a question right now, but we're not. So I'm going to give this to you a little bit, is that many times we only are offering a value. We're not exchanging a value. So that means that the individual that you're engaged with or the other company that you're looking to solidify a business with or terms with has not offered you something back by way of value. So I want to pause there real quick, and I am going to look for some participation here because I need to understand what people are thinking about this one concept before I move to the next slide. Is that when I make the mention of exchanging values, can someone give me a personal example of what that looks like in their space?
Hello, this is Ken Best. In my space, I'm a financial advisor. Um, I basically am a first responder for financial issues. Um, I provide financial expertise, give people peace of mind and comfort in their finances and in retirement. In exchange for that, I receive compensation. Um, so I guess that's the exchange. They're getting something for what from me, and I'm getting something back from my expertise. So
So
it's an exchange.
thanks so much, Ken, for stepping up and starting our dialogue with that. I
Yes.
appreciate it. I actually appreciate your attendance as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
And that when you talk about the exchange of the value, here's where it becomes problematic, even in those words.
Mm-hmm.
is that that value has to be articulated by the receiver.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have never taken the time to receive what is valuable from them, and for them to articulate that they're actually going to exchange that value for that, now we're assuming the value.
Mm-hmm.
And that allows for it to get stuck. Because we say, can't they see everything that I'm giving them? Don't they know that I'm giving them peace of mind? But simultaneously, they've never articulated it at a level to where they were to say, you know what would be really valuable to me is if you were to give me a peace of mind. Does that logic make sense?
Right. Yes.
Right. So we understand it because we're in that space, but they may not understand it. They may see it completely differently. So now you've got this philosophical mismatch on values. Now you're negotiating out of the wrong faith.
Mm.
So even with a price point, you might say, this is very reasonable for what I offer. Well, it might not be to them because they didn't articulate the appropriate value. So now all of a sudden, this given time gets stretched out. And then if you've been in sales in any time, and I'm speaking for the collective masses here, I've been in sales since 1993 at some level, at a high level. I've been number one in 5 different industries. And one thing we would always talk about in sales is that time is a deal killer. The more time it takes for someone to make a decision, the harder it becomes for them to actually say yes. So in that case, this given time gets stretched because these values are not properly articulated, given, and received. So therefore, they're assumed and nothing gets moved. And hopefully, this logic is making sense to everyone, is that if this is the most fundamental concept of business, then I actually have to master these activities, master this process, understand what I'm negotiating, and make sure that I gain these values. Does anyone have any questions at all before we go to the next slide? Okay.
I had one question.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you said you have to get them to articulate the value they want, but if you can't get them to articulate it, do you lead them down a trail where they articulate themselves or have a self-realization of the value? Because if you know the industry that you're playing in, therefore you should be the expert trying to lead your customer to the value and what you're offering, but not only offering to them, but that they need for their industry. Like for instance, yesterday I talked to a funeral home director, and a big thing she's looking for with products she brings in is that they have to be hypoallergenic. Now on my end, I know that's a value that we offer from our product line, but let's say I go to somebody else, they don't articulate it to me, but I know it's a value added. Do you lead them down that train of thought and create the questions and that dialogue?
That answer is yes, yes, and no.
Okay.
And I know you've probably never heard someone answer something like that before, but here's why that's the answer. Is yes, you want to lead them down there. Why? Because that's a process. And then yes, you want to do it because you want to understand what you're going to be negotiating over. But the answer is no, is because even though it's a value for someone else, it still may not be valuable for them. So therefore, you have to lead them down, create the influences that makes them articulate, well, you know what? I can see where that could be helpful, but what's really valuable to me is this. Now you get them from being unstuck. Because let's say, for an example, they say no to you early, or if they're unsure early, or if they don't give a real answer early, and we're going to talk about that. And here you are following up, trying to get them to say yes. You can always remind them of the value proposition and say, you know what, Samantha, you told me it was valuable for you to be able to figure this one aspect out. And it seems to me as if you've never actually figured out a solution for that. So the thing that you hold most valuable, you currently don't have a solution, and I do. Now I can unstick you.
Okay.
All right, does that logic make sense?
Yes.
Right. And so as we move forward, and what's really good about that is the prospect origin. And that prospect origin is understanding, who is this person? Where did they come from? So when we talk about who are they and where did they come from, are they a person that is in the market for what you have? Are they a current customer, or are they an ambassador, meaning that are they a strategic partner? Is there an alliance? Were they an early adopter? Anything like that. So the reason why this becomes vitally important is because someone might need, uh, let's call it a widget right now. Somebody needs this widget. However, just because they need a widget doesn't mean that they need your widget. They might need another widget type, or they may be unfamiliar with yours. So because of that, how you unstick that person has everything to do with how they come to know about you. If you have a customer already and you want that customer to do more, well, that customer can still be an unstuck deal because they're only participating at a level that may not be conducive for all you're offering, and they could be participating at a higher level, which increases your profit margin, which increases your sustainability, on and on and on and on. So in that case, what you talk to them about, how you offer it to them, is also going to be different. And if this person has a vested interest in working with you, or they benefit directly from working with you from other ancillary ways, well, sometimes they get stuck. When you look at investors, for an example, if I'm a startup, I've got an investor, I'm trying to get another deal done, that investor might be stuck. And I've got to find a way to unstick that investor. So that comes with awareness and discovery. So when we talk about awareness and discovery, is how did they come to know about you, and what were all of the activities and the experiences surrounding them even understanding that you had something to give. So if I go back to you, Ken Best, considering that you were the first to speak up, so now I'm going to beat you up as a volunteer, so thanks for doing so, is that in the financial world, there's
All
not just
right.
one way to look at finances.
Correct.
You might look at, your retirement portfolio being made up of life insurance. Well,
Mm-hmm.
someone else might look at it as being made up of IRAs. Someone else might think you're going to show you how to buy individual stocks. Well, because of that, the consumer might say, I want to save money. Then they become aware of you by seeing an ad or by meeting you at an event. Well, now all of a sudden, how do those two things combine? As you go down the rabbit hole, that then can lead to something being stuck based on all of your activity of negotiation and exchanging values. Then that discovery is not only how they come to know about you, but then what are all of the things that you're doing together that makes them learn about you, that also reinforces engagement. And so it becomes important to be able to say, all right, this is where I know this person from, or this is where I'm going to get my consumers from. This is the message I want them to see. This is how I want them to react and respond to me and see me back. And this is my call to action. And so that's going to look different for all three of these stages. Then you're looking at your offering versus your expectation. So if I go back to you, and I believe that was Sanjay Ramal who spoke, is that when you're talking about your funeral home director there, well, in this case, you might be giving them something. I know this is valuable to you, but if their expectation is completely different, they'll never see the value. And a lot of times when you're a business owner or you're a startup founder and you've got the greatest idea since the wheel and fire, you think everyone should see that and expect the same result from that, and they don't. That's based on articulation, it's based on positioning, it's based on the awareness and the discovery, and you have to be sound in these aspects and making a point of differentiation of how they've come to know about you. I'll give a great example. This morning, I was telling this to my team in our team meeting. I had a very early contractor come to my house because my wife and I are conducting a home renovation. We're redoing our kitchen and we're redoing our children's bathroom. So the contractor for the granite comes in, and he's a gentleman of Hispanic descent. And he comes in and we're having a great conversation. And he asked me, he says, what kind of doctor are you? I said, I'm a business doctor. I make businesses healthy. And he says, you mean to tell me you can make my business better just by the things that you know? And I said, yes, that's what I do all day, every day for companies all around the world. And he says, well, give me a tip right now. And I said, well, it's kind of difficult because I need to learn a little bit more about what you do, but I can say, do you have a sales cycle and do you know who you're soliciting? And that concept was a little foreign to him. And he said, well, I kind of use Facebook to tell people that I exist. And I said, okay, that's great. And Facebook converts at 2.4%. And so therefore you have to make a lot of posts in order for people to understand that you exist. And he said, I never knew that the conversion was that low. And I said, yeah, it is. So he says, well, can I give you my card and maybe we can talk about, maybe you can help me out. And I said, yeah. He said, oh, I don't have my cards. My cards are at home. So I sent him my card, and my card is digital. He had never seen a digital business card before. I walked him through the digital business card, and he thought it was the greatest thing ever. Then I told him I had a Latino department, and it's run by Renan Delgado, who sits in our Raleigh, North Carolina hospital. And he said, you actually have a Spanish-speaking department. I said, yes, I do. Well, the reason why I'm telling you guys the story is because this is an origin story. How I come to know him as a consumer changes if he's a customer, then changes if he's an ambassador, how he became aware, what was the discovery like. I have not offered him anything yet, but he is expecting for me to teach him how to grow his business. So now my offering, and if I can go back, and hopefully I'm putting this together well enough for you guys to see, is that now my offering is going to be a process of negotiation, and I'm going to make him tell me what his values are. When he tells me what his values are, I'm not going to assume them. I'm going to create my process to match his value proposition. And hopefully that makes good sense, because now it has everything to do with, how did I find this person? Whereas someone else might already be in this stage, or someone else might be in that stage, and my approach has to be different. Are there any questions or thoughts about this slide before we go to the next one? Okay, great. So conversion metric, which sounds really confusing to a lot of people. I know for a person that hates math like myself, I hate looking at metrics, but I have to do them. But the reality is we need to understand, how do we convert? So if we're talking a consumer, which is a person that has not bought your products, the customer that has, or an ambassador, well, your metrics are going to be different. All leads are not equal. If we look at them as if they're equal, now we're making the mistake that everyone is expecting the same things and they view our offering similar. And so from that standpoint, we're going to treat them similar, and then deals are going to get stuck. We have to take the time to look at them individually and customize our approach, our process, and once again, those activities that we do to match the consumer on this ladder. So then the process for lead cultivation differ. So how I go and spit my message out to a brand new person that does not know that we wrote a patent on how to train athletes to the metronome of music to increase rhythm, tempo, and pace, which is a real thing that we've done. When we're trying to tell someone about that concept of ours, well, where are they in that? Are they a college athlete? Are they a high school athlete? Are they a gym and healthcare facility? Are they dealing with functional movement? Is it the NFL? Is it the NBA? Who are they, and what's that process? And how I work that process is going to determine if that deal gets stuck or not. So hopefully what you guys are understanding right now is we're talking about the foundation of your engagement, of your process, so that you minimize how many deals get stuck. So then you can focus on how to unstick those deals when they do get stuck, but now your percentage of stuck deals are lower. Then you want to compare your skill set to the task. So in this case, let's say for an example, you are an introvert. You are not really good, or at least you don't believe that you are, that you can go out and just communicate to people all day long. You're not making 20 phone calls. You're not making 50 phone calls. You're not knocking on doors. You're not engaging in social media, putting out posts every day. Well, if you believe that that's not your skill set, then you have to create a task that matches that skill set to push those customers or consumers through the funnel better, so therefore they're not stuck. So that means that that may have something to do with your approach to those individuals if the skill set doesn't match. Because if the skill set doesn't match, and I'll give you an example of that, if I have not been really good at mastering my articulation of my offering, I'm not great at selling from a verbal standpoint, if you will, I need to know that and create a process that covers up that deficiency. Because if I'm not good enough at doing that, even if they like what I have, if it takes persuasion, then I'm not going to be able to persuade them past the portion where they're stuck and they're going to sit there. And so I have to recognize that early and then create a process to be able to go around it. So we want to talk about that with your USP. I know that there's some people here on this call that know what USP is. Can someone tell me that's not on my team what USP stands for?
Hi, it stands for unique selling proposition. Oh,
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm glad you took the plunge and jumped in. So yeah, absolutely. It's a unique selling proposition. And that unique selling proposition is the thing that you carry with you all the time. You know, if we were an Avengers movie and you were Bruce Banner, you'd be a doctor and a scientist, but they only keep you around because you can turn green and tear things up. So that's his unique selling proposition to the team. Well, in this case, your unique selling proposition will also help you get stuck deals unstuck, because that is the thing that people will buy. So the first question that you have to ask yourself is, did you articulate it appropriately? Well, a lot of times people don't take the time to mention what they do well. To give you an example, they don't even know what they do well. Every member of my team, before they became a member of my team, I had to force them to tell me if their children's lives were on the line, what skill set would they use to save them? And I asked that question just to know, what is the thing that makes you the superhero? And if you are the superhero in one given instance, then you need to articulate that. So for myself personally, just to use myself as an example for the sake of the group, I am only good at telling people what to do and how to do it. So if we're playing basketball, my job is to pick the team and determine who takes the shots. If we're going to go somewhere to eat, then I'm kind of leading the charge on what we're going to eat that day. Well, my family knows it. My friends know it. My colleagues know it. They say, if you ask him, he's going to tell you, because the only thing he knows how to do is that. Well, that's also how I created my company, is the fact that if people need direction, I know how to give it. You will hire me to give you direction. And we make it very clear and very plain that that's what we do. Well, if your skill set is something different, how are you articulating this to where they understand that value proposition? Well, next, which is what we just stated, is do they understand it? So you might think that you put it to them, but maybe they don't know. So when it comes to a product or a service, that unique selling proposition exists inside of that product or service. So if I had to use a restaurant for an example, when you go to Cane's, you know you're going to get a chicken finger because they don't offer anything else. And you know that they have cane sauce, which is their own mix of sauce. Well, in that reality, they've told the world, this is what we're giving you. And we're really good at this. And if you like a chicken finger with a unique sauce, you need to come to us. And they've carved their niche out by being able to do that. And so they regurgitate that message on and on and on again around there. So when you think about your offering, whether it's a product or a service, do the people understand it, or are they confused by it? Well, next you have to determine if your USP is needed. I don't know if anyone's ever had this experience before, but I imagine you have. You've gone to the mall, and as you're in the mall looking for a shirt to wear to a wedding, someone pulls you over at the kiosk and asks you to try, some form of a lotion, or they ask you about your cell phone plan. Well, it really doesn't match what I'm here for. So because it doesn't match what I'm here for, I'm going to ignore it and I'll never see the need in it. It will actually turn me against the product unless I'm in dire need, and the only person I can get it from is you. So in this case, and let's go back, Mr. Ramadit, to your reality and your example with the funeral home director, You might say, this one product, I know for a fact you're going to need. But if they don't understand it, it's not articulated well enough, or they don't even perceive a need there, that deal is going to get stuck. And what's going to happen in the mind of the entrepreneur or the business owner is that, man, I don't understand why they can't see how good this is or how beneficial this is. They're going to miss it. And so when they miss it, they don't move. And when they don't move, it frustrates you, and you spend more resources trying to push them when you will never be able to push them because of the philosophical mismatch. And then lastly here, did you close the USP? And we're going to talk a little bit more about closing later, but you have to get the in-person to agree and close on the fact that they recognize the USP. And that can be very difficult because that type of speech is not a speech that we're classically trained to use. So I'll give you a role play example of that. Is if I'm talking to a potential client and I say, well, we help clients or customers all over the world grow their businesses. We find that it's very valuable that they have a person that can have an objective look at their operation to be able to give them more information on how to operate. Do you see any value in that? Well, yeah, I do see value in that. Can you see how the things that I've talked to you today demonstrate my proficiency and expertise in teaching businesses how to do that? Yes, I do see exactly what you mean, and I do see your expertise in that. Now I've closed them. Now they know that, or we both know, you think that what I have can benefit you based on the discussion. It's a very programmed version of speech that you have to practice to where it's no longer programmed, but it becomes a part of your vernacular. So therefore you're playing on the same page. It becomes a part of your process. So therefore you can unstick them later when they pause or they don't move forward. You can go ahead and say, well, when we spoke last, you said that my service was valuable and you believed I had the ability to do it. What did I miss? You have now earned the right to be able to talk to them about their movement. And then they're going to tell you from that point, because it seems illogical when you say it out loud that I need something, you have what I need, and I trust you to give it to me. Now we can isolate that objection and be able to move forward. I want to pause here for a moment. Any questions, any thoughts about the USP, articulating the USP, or how you're going to look at your leads when you're talking to them and using your USP connecting to it? Any thoughts, challenges, or questions about that?
Can you, so go into that again about closing the USP. So that language that you use.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going, you're a financial advisor. This person needs assistance with, advice. They've come along some way or another to where you guys are now talking about your offering. Well, I want to pinpoint in that instance, don't you want to either save more money, make more money, reduce your tax obligations, protect your assets, whatever concept you're talking about in the financial realm? And they tell you yes. Then from that standpoint, you've told them whether it was your personal USP or your company's USP, and you say, can you see how company X, Y, and Z is going to be able to help you do that? And their answer is yes. And is it safe to say that this is your biggest value proposition? If we could fix this thing for you, that makes a world of a difference to you. Is that correct? Yes. Mm-hmm. There's not much left past that point outside of let's move forward.
Got it.
And so you have to practice that speech to make sure that you're getting that out of them, because there's going to come a time, whether it's because they don't have enough money, they procrastinate, there's a family emergency, there's been a pivot in the business, there'll be something that happens that they don't move. You follow back up with them and say, hey, Frank, I thought we were going to move forward with this, and something else comes out. Well, in that case, you can remind them, you said this was your biggest value proposition. Because here's the reality. If it's not your biggest value proposition, what were we talking for, and where was it on the priority scale? So did I spend 2 months cultivating you for a 2-point on the conversion scale? Does that logic make sense where I'm going there, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
See,
Very
so
much
if
so.
my conversion metric, and I'm saying this guy's problem is a 2, I'm not going to spend 2 months on a 2. I'm going to spend 2 months on a 10. And what is my conversion ratio for converting that particular problem? So if I had to use myself as an example, and hope my examples are seeing your businesses for every individual here. And if you have an example you want me to talk about, please speak up. But in my case, if a person is not ready to pay a retainer for my services, and I tell my practitioners this, why am I talking to them if they don't want to hire the doctor to help make their business healthy? So don't bring them to me. If I'm talking to them and they hear my voice, they have a problem. And it's my job to solve that problem. So where are they on that scale? And there's times that we'll get on and it's, well, I'm not ready to hire somebody for 2 years. Well, I've never hired a consultant, so I'm not really comfortable. Well, how did we get here? Now you're stuck. And that makes that difficult to unstick you from that point. But why did that happen? Because now I'm negotiating a value proposition that they never articulated. So I'm fighting against myself at that standpoint.
Gotcha.
Does everyone understand? Is anybody confused by that where I can clear any of that up? Anyone else with any examples or questions at all before we continue to move forward?
So what happens, client says, yes, great value, I see everything that's good. However, I can't move forward right now because, something's changed. Now you are, on your end, you're selling a product. Do you push or do you understand, or do you push to understand what's going on and then keep that customer on a list of touch back later, or keep in contact until that relationship has yielded the result that you initially talked about?
It depends on where they are here. Some customers or consumers, depending on where they are in that funnel, some you just have to understand and just say, we get it. And then we follow up, and we're going to talk about that later specifically. So just know I won't forget that part. Okay. And others you have to push. And so I've got a great example of that. I was in the middle of one of my client follow-ups, and we were stuck, and they are a consumer. They are not a customer, but I've got such a relationship with them because of how many times I've been engaged with them. They've sat in probably 7 of my classes I've taught in person. I have a relationship now where I just say, you're going to get moving or get off. I can talk to them that way and unstick it one way or the other. Now, in that case, I've also stopped soliciting them. I stopped soliciting them after the 3rd go round. They continue to solicit back, and my response to those regurgitated solicitation efforts is, if you're ready to hire, let's move forward. If you aren't, we stop. But that's a different level of push. Others you can't push at that level. So it depends on where they are here. And it also depends on other secrets of persuasion. If this was more of a sales training, I would go into that. But in that case, it depends on where you are on that list, if you will, of persuasion. So if you've got rapport with them, if they like you, then obviously you can push harder. If they're uncertain about you, you can't push at all. So it's those realities. And so it's predicated on other factors. I'm going to answer your other question about where that person can go. Does anyone else have any questions about this before we move forward?
Dr. Baker?
Yes.
It's an interesting point. The USP is actually very timely and very helpful, but I actually want to go back to the conversion metrics for just a second. So as we're looking at, we get the leads in there, obviously you get your list, however it might be. And this, frankly, question might be a whole conversation in and of itself, but the qualification process, the way you're going through and you're having these great conversations about the USP with these prospects, it's really the question of the qualification on the conversions. So you said, some might be a 2, some might be a 10. And unless it's kind of a warm introduction or you've got some background, there's more information you may know about this as a prospect. If you're simply just doing really just pure research, building your business, etc. I mean, what techniques do you use, or do you even do that now? Or is everything you have coming in really kind of these warm leads so you qualify them quickly? But for those of us that are maybe still building and working to really kind of get to know our community and our business area, what would you recommend? How do we go about finding information quickly so we can distill the twos from the tens maybe a little more rapidly and help us really focus on the value?
That's a fantastic question. And there's a couple different layers for the answer for that. Number one, it depends on if you need microtransactions to exist and if you need a broad consumer base or if you need a small one. If you have a business where you're doing 2 or 3 deals a year and that makes your entire fiscal year, then how you qualify them are going to be different than if you need 200 transactions in a day. So in that case, if you are on the side of microtransactions, then you have to have a system to make sure that you're playing where they are. You have to be in the right sandbox, if you will. And that takes a lot of research. That takes diligence on how people see and view your product. And that takes an understanding of how to be able to move either with the trends or create the trends. Because now what you're saying is that, well, who's my prospect? So if I'm a restaurant owner, well, where are my prospects? Who are they? Well, if I'm a chain, and I'm buying a franchise, I buy Tropical Smoothie Plus or Tropical Smoothie Cafe rather, that's one type of clientele. But if I'm a mom and pop restaurant, well, that's different. But we both need the same amount of foot traffic to exist. If I am a tech company and I'm looking to just be business to business, well, that's going to change my metrics dramatically because the sophistication level of my client is different. And so now I have to look at them in a way of how do they typically purchase things and what are their typical purchase cycles. So you would have to then add that into it. If I have transactional history where I only need 2, 3, 4, 5 deals a year, well, now how long is my sales cycle and where should I be putting my time on? So if it takes me 5 months in order to convert the deal that we need to have done, to make the first part of our forecast, well, if I'm soliciting 6 different companies for that one spot, it's also going to help me understand, well, what's their cycle like? So if they put me on a 12-month cycle and I need 5 months, well, now that person just became a 2, even if they have the ability to pay, because we may not even exist by the time we turn them over. And so it's really understanding that part of the model and then creating a process around that model and then having it in a way where it can be duplicated so you're not guessing. So when we talk about guessing is that social media a lot of times is a guess. And the reason why I'm picking on social media because it's so easy, everyone leans on it immediately, but it's a guess because you're pushing information to the world, not knowing how they're going to react and respond to you. Whereas opposed to other business models, you're not just pushing it hoping for some type of a return, you're making the return. You're creating it based on your skill set. So now you have to judge your own skill set. So if you're honest with yourself and you say, if I'm as a salesperson, I'm really a 4. I'd like to be higher, but I'm not. I'm a 4. So because I'm a 4, maybe a good person, let's say that we call them a 10. Maybe they have to see 10 people, but I got to see 50. So because I'm a 4 and I got to see 50, well, how long does it take me to see 50 to get the same result as a person that's a 10? And so you have to start comparing your skill set with the sales cycle of the target audience and then matching that together. And quite frankly, that's not even a skill set that most business owners are trained to do. And that's why it gets hard. Does that answer your question at some level?
It does help. Thank you. I mean, you've given me a couple of points to think through as I go forward. Because I'm not only working on my business, but I'm a consultant and I help others as well. So that's why this is very fascinating. Thank you.
Correct. And so it just makes it difficult because when you squeeze the balloon on one side, it might pop out on the other.
Very true.
And all balloons are not created the same. Some are long, some are wide. And so when you're looking at business, you have to look at it in those lenses, which is why, as we're talking about these different concepts, the best I can do is give you some form of a macro that leads into a thought, but the individualized approach is better because you have to still execute it. But really good question. Anybody else have a question or a thought? All right, we'll jump into sales clarity. So inside of sales clarity, we want to talk about sales versus education. And what I found over 25 years of business, looking at sales consultants all over, most people don't sell a thing, they just educate people. They tell people what they have. They're not convincing and they're not persuading and they're not creating calls of action. So when you tell someone, well, I told them everything about our company. Okay, you didn't tell them to do something next. So you have to identify your process. And when I'm talking about your process is the entire cycle, your verbiage of what you use, how you push individuals from consumer to customer to ambassador, is that now you have to be mindful that when I'm getting on this call is definitely a sales call, or this is definitely an education call. So for an example, this Cintrifuse webinar is an education call. I'm not calling you guys to action of any type. This is me giving you information and you guys will make declarations based on the information that's given. However, if we were on a one-to-one, I'd be asking you specifically, we're going to do this next. Do you agree? And how soon will it be before we know that we can get this thing done? All right, so that'll be a direct call to action, and that's a sales approach. Well, next, you have to collect your agreements. So this sounds pretty funny, and this is a tactical thing that I've used forever, and this is one thing that I'll be giving out for free here, is you have to count your yeses. When you're talking to someone and you're engaged in the sales process with them, you need at least 25 yeses before you can actually close them to do business with you. So I would even challenge you guys as you're thinking about it, how many times have you actually counted the amount of times that your prospect has said yes to you in regards to what you're doing? And not to put my team on the spot, and typically I would, but they'll tell you when we're engaged, I'll say, how many yeses did we get? And they might say, dag, I forgot to count. Well, if a person tells you yes 25 times, it's hard for them to tell you no when it's time to do business. And hopefully that logic makes really good sense. Because if they tell me no after 25 yeses, that means that they hid that no on me, and I've got a right to ask them, why did they hide the most important value proposition in the entire conversation? And hopefully that's logical to everyone on the call there. And so from here, you have to have clear action steps. Mrs. Smith, you've told me yes to every single thing that we've talked about. That tells me that you're in agreement with what I'm offering and that you value my service. Is that correct? Yes. Great. Well, what we're going to do next is I'm going to follow back up with you in 72 hours. And I would like for us to be able to move forward from there. Is that okay with you? Yes. I call Miss Smith back in 72 hours and she doesn't answer. Then I call her back 2 days from there and she doesn't answer again. Now I can tell her, well, Miss Smith, you told me, you asked me to call you back in 72 hours and I've done that. You told me I had all the answers for you and that it was something that not only were you interested in, that you had value in it. Please explain to me why I can't find you now. And it's okay to say it that directly. What happens to Miss Smith is she tells you she had to go out of town abruptly. She had idea, she had limited access to her phone, but yes, she still is interested. Can we move forward? Now I unstick that deal. If she calls me back and she says, you know what, I just been thinking about it and I just don't really understand this, that, and the other, now I'm really happy because her hidden concepts have now just been made public to me. And I can now answer those questions. I can redirect them. I can challenge them, which leads us back into another yes, which is why all your action steps have to be clear. And then once again, I'm closing every single step. Ms. Smith, you do want me to call you on Tuesday at 10 o'clock. Is that right? Yes. I will call you then. Great, great. Ms. Smith, you did say that you needed help with organizational strategy. Is that right? Yes. Do you have a way of helping your own organizational strategy right now? No, I don't. Would it be beneficial for you if someone did? Yes. That's what I'm here to do. Is that your understanding? Yes. So if I create a diagnosis that helps you with that, you would find that helpful. Is that right? Yes. You have to close every single step. You cannot expect for them to close it. And then you have to be consistent on anything that you've closed. You say you're going to call in 72 hours, there better be a phone call. and you want to continue to close from there. Any questions about this slide at all? Okay, we'll continue to move. So that allows you the opportunity to rebuttal challenges. And so we want to take care of one, the question rationale. A lot of times individuals will have questions or they don't question why someone is telling them no. You have to have a scenario where you've earned the right to be able to question their beliefs. So in the event that someone has disappeared, someone hasn't said yes, they're kind of in the middle, or they're giving you excuses or explanations as to why 19 other people have to say yes, you have the right to question it. So explain to me, when you set our assessment meeting, you told me that you were the decision maker. How did we get to meeting 3 and there's 3 other people that also have to sign off? You have the right to question that, because you've earned it if you've provided great service, you've demonstrated your USP, you've articulated appropriately, and you forced them to tell you what was valuable. So therefore, you want to question it. Then you want to revisit the original premise. So Ms. Smith, you told me that you were a decision maker. Come to find out you got 3 people behind you. Is that all 3, or is there somebody else I need to know about? No, that's it. You know, our director has to sign and the department head has to sign. Okay, great. So now that we know that, is the original premise, you still want organizational strategy help? Yes. Is that still the primary value proposition for you and the company? Yes. Would the department head agree with you on that assessment? Yes. So now I'm going to create an action step. I need to talk to the department head. Would the department head be interested in learning more about how we can help you all with organizational strategy? And that's a yes or a no. If that answer is no, I'm going to question the rationale. Because if all of you guys are decision makers, how did you end up here talking about something that you didn't have the power to be able to effectively change, and the other person isn't even interested in changing it? Why would we be having that conversation? What that speaks to is another problem, and then you create another problem and offer a solution to that. It appears as if communication internally needs assistance and bolstering. Who's responsible for the communication flow in your department? Is this typically how you guys make decisions? Is this why your organizational strategy isn't working well enough? So you want to question it, revisit the original premise, and then operate with strength. You stated that you guys were unable to accomplish your company goals. You said that was valuable, but simultaneously, you're not doing anything else about it. You stated that I had the right value proposition, that I articulated well enough, and I've got the right USP to handle it. What am I missing? We do this all over. We've been doing this for 25 years, or we've done it for 392 companies, whatever it is you want to say that allows you to operate in strength. That's what you have to use. That's how you move that deal. You get that deal pushed forward because you're getting to the root of the problem as to why they can't pull the triggers themselves. Any questions or thoughts?
I think that that's probably the hardest part in this process that you talked about, because oftentimes the people that you end up making the pitch to, they may have a sense of authority that you don't want to question, because they kind of wear it, you know, as part of their persona, and they also are maybe not in as much control as you thought they were, and you need to do this in a way that doesn't challenge their integrity. I think what works for me oftentimes would be to be more consultative to them, is how can I help you get over the objections of others? Any thoughts on how you approach that when you run into that situation? We appreciate it.
I think your position was perfectly articulated, and I'm glad that you said it. And what you did is that you actually spoke back to a point here when we're talking about comparing the skill set to task. I can get away with saying things that other people can't. I've been able to do it my entire life. I can say something that sounds negative. I can say something that sounds arrogant, and it will win over my client. The next person does it, and somebody gets irritated, they get angry, or they say that that person was disrespectful. Well, how does that happen? Everyone has a different skill set. If I were to take the approach that you mentioned, I would actually not yield a return on it because my behavior and personality traits, it doesn't come off right. So if I were to say, well, how can I help you? For some reason, I don't get the same result. If I say, so you were lying to me, huh? You really couldn't make that decision. Well, no, Dr. Baker, really wasn't that, and you right. And then they'll do what I ask them to do. So that has everything to do with the skill set. So the way that you just positioned it will probably work for you much more than the way that I positioned it. However, that has a lot to do with the conversion metric. So if you know that, well, every time I put it in a consultative manner, I'm converting those 50% of the time. But when I called somebody to the fire, when I did that 10 times, only one person responded positively to that. Well, I know that I'm not okay with that because I'm not getting the dividend that I want. But when I offer them in a different way, they respond better. You've got to take inventory of your own skill set when you're executing these different strategies. Does that logic make good sense?
Yeah, it does. I think it probably also is you've got a more heightened perception as to who's going to be receptive to that. Whereas I might be afraid to do it, even though I could. I might think that it's not going to work. And you've shown that it does.
Well, correct. And that's why we have to understand, number one, all leads are not equal. So how we're talking to them, we better be in tune to who we're engaged with. I'll give you an example. And actually, I learned this for the first time at this level in this example. This was actually revolutionary for me. I actually yelled at a client when I was in the automotive industry and I was a director of sales. And I yelled at him very meanly. I said, you get out of here. We don't ever want to see you again. We don't do business this way. We don't need your money. You leave. He bought 4 more cars from me because he said I was the only person that ever stood up to him in his life. And not to mention, this is a true story, was actually in the hospital with cancer and he called me. And I went to go visit him, me and my wife did. And he became more than just a client. But it was unique to me that he was pushing over my salesman and I went to bat for my salesman. And my salesman was a young guy, not too long out of college, and he was really nervous and apprehensive. And he was bullying my sales guy. So I bullied the bully. And in that case, he respected it. Now you're sitting here saying, well, heck, I don't want to be this chameleon for everyone. You don't have to be. Be whoever you are. But understand that that affects your conversion metric. And it also depends on your model. So all of that becomes really important. I just noticed my time. I got 6 minutes to cover 4 slides. So we're going to push. But that was a really good question. So here, system and processes. This is back to Mr. Ramadit's question. You're talking to somebody. They say no, I don't know, potentially, maybe. Yes, you want to stick them into a system. You want to have a process for that. Touch point calculation. How many times do I need to touch that particular person before they say yes or no, or before I decide that they're now a dead file? And that may be different. So you might have, I'm going to contact them 4 times. I'm going to contact them 14 times. But whatever it is, you need to have a calculation and know what works. Sometimes it might take somebody 7 yeses or 7 touch points before they say a final yes. And you need to know what that is. Procedural timeliness. So if I know that I've got 7 touch points that I need to execute, well, what's my time frame for that? Is it 7 touch points in a 6-month span, or is it 7 touch points in a week span? And so you have to understand that delicate balance based on your consumer base. Once again, that's also not easy to determine, especially when you're not classically trained for it, but you also have to do it through trial and error because your execution style has a lot to do with what works versus what does not work. And then next, the additional value comparison. I will spend a full minute on this. Let's say, for an example, you've cultivated this person. They've said yes. They gave you the inclination that they were going to move forward. Then they don't. 2 months pass, 3 months pass. They still have not said yes. Maybe 2 or 3 more months pass, or maybe there hasn't been a lot of dialogue in between, and you're trying to recultivate. What you have to do is determine if there's new value propositions. So one way that we do this, and I'll just give you a strategy of ours, is if there's a customer that's been waiting in the wings for a long time, we'll come back and show them a success story of someone that made the money that they should have made. And we'll say, while you were thinking about it, they went ahead and made 100 grand. So what were you doing? And it changes their value proposition. Or we just cut their cost by 52 grand. How much more did you spend than you wanted to based on what we talked about 6 months ago? So now all of a sudden we've re-engaged with an additional value comparison, and now it unsticks them from that standpoint. And it works with investors, it works with everyone. So our pipeline management is, how do we see these people? And sometimes a no is not a no is later. And one of the biggest lessons I had to teach my team is that if they're in our pipeline, they might be a yes for November, and you'll want to convert them in November. So that means you have to determine if they're short-term or long-term, if there's new value recognition while you're going through the steps, and then offer reciprocity while you're there. So you're giving them something that is unwarranted and unexpected, but it's a value to them, and you did not have to do it. They recognize that. Now they behave with you. And so you want to offer that reciprocity, and then you want to offer a new closing action. So if they're in that pipeline, it's been 4 or 5 months, you told them about a new value proposition, they confirm that value proposition. You say, I tell you what I'm going to do for you. What I'm going to do is, you had problems with this, I'm going to knock that thing out for you. Great. You knock that thing out. Then you say, is there another time that I can get you and the decision makers to talk about this new value proposition? And this time, let's figure out a way to be able to do business together. Can I count on you to do that? They say yes to that. Now you hold their feet to the fire to get that done. If they say yes to that and they disappear, then that's not the client that you need. You're wasting too many resources working with that individual. And so they never were a deal in the first place. We would call that in sales a mind deal, where they keep you strung along and you feel like it's something, but really it's nothing the entire time. And so you don't want that. There's my contact information. If anybody needs to contact us or talk a little bit more about any of the strategies, our assessments are free and our diagnoses are free as well. So hopefully nobody runs away from that. And we're still offering free disaster relief services if anybody needs help with COVID-19 and business problems from there.